Hi, Stephen. We've got you here today to talk about your book, The Wines of Great Britain, and also the English wine and Welsh wine industry as a whole. But I think for those who don't know you, it would be useful to get some background on yourself. And I know you've been involved in wine for many, many years, but could you briefly sum up your journey to where you are today?
Okay, well, in 1973, when my son was born, my first child, we were looking for a new to move to a new bigger house. We only had a little one-bedroom cottage at the time, and we saw a property for sale that had a little vineyard attached to it in Nettlestead near Maidstone. That vineyard is no longer there, but we got back. I didn't buy the house. We didn't buy the house, but we got back, and obviously I don't remember the sequence of events, but I found out there was a English Vineyards Association, which subsequently I joined. And we went to one or two events that they had put on. We went visited a few vineyards. The new hall in Essex was one of the first I visited because that was where my parents lived. I grew up in the famous CM3 postcode, which is now the most bevineyarded, if that's the right word, postcode in the country. Encompasses the Crouch Valley, which is well known nowadays for its quality grapes. And we went to see one or two others. I got in touch with some people on the Isle of Wight, Adgerston, which was one of the leading vineyards of the time. And slowly but surely, we got the idea of planting our own vineyard and getting into the business. My father-in-law, who was was a large-scale arable farmer, he was very supportive. He said, well, he basically said, if you get trained, you learn how to do it, you do the work, I'll find the farm for you. And, it's a marriage made in wherever, Kent. And that's what happened. And, we went to Germany for 2 years. I learned German because, the varieties we grew at the time were Germanic mainly, apart from Sèvres Blanc. The technology we used was Germanic. The help that people had got, Lamberhurst had help from Geisenheim. Dr. Becker, Professor Dr. Becker at Geisenheim had been very helpful to a number of growers in the country. And so it felt that Germany was the place to go. As I say, I learned German and worked for 12 months in a big vineyard and winery out there, learned obviously firsthand how to do it, how to prune, how to plant, how to canopy management, if you didn't call it that in those days, how to weed. That was, the first job I ever had. And then I started going to Geisenheim as a guest student, guest her as they call it, a guest student. And I did then after I finished work, I did a couple of terms there, by which time my father-in-law had found a farm which he wanted to buy anyway, and there was some good land on it. And he bought it when we basically moved in and started, the next spring we started planting vines, Easter Monday, 1977. And that today is where Chapel Down is based.
Right, okay.
Where the winery is. I had nothing to do with the founding of Chapel Down. And we had that for a number of years, and then eventually we sold it. I carried on winemaking there. I made wine there for 22 consecutive vintages. And then things changed and I got out, and then I became a consultant, essentially, since around just the turn of the century, so over 20 years now.
And what about the desire to be, or rather what moment was it that you thought, I'm going to be an MW? Because that's such a feat to have that as an achievement, particularly with how well you did as well. I think you've done one of the highest marks ever.
Yeah, of my intake. Yeah, well, I mean, that was the sort of logical, I started, we put on the English wine industry, which I was a director of the EVA for 20 odd years, 23 years, I think. And we put on a day at the WSET, the Wine and Spirit Education Trust, on English wine. And I spoke about the viticulture side of it. And having spoken about that, the viticulture lecturer at the WSET had a terrible accident and became a paraplegic subsequent. But I was asked to step in to give the viticulture lessons for the higher diploma, the higher certificate, which was the sort of under the diploma, and then the next year for the diploma. And for 1 year, I was doing a higher certificate and diploma in the same year. And so I had all this theoretical knowledge, I had the practical knowledge. I didn't have the wine tasting, which was a bit of a stumbling block for me. But I went on and I sort of carried on lecturing on the diploma for a long while and got involved with a lot of MWs who were also lecturers, and I sort of got into I knew a lot of MWs, I thought, well, I'll give it a go, and I joined the course in, I forget, in '95, I think, I took the exam at the first opportunity, which was after sort of 18 months or 2 years, I forget now. And yeah, I passed the written side. There's the written side, the tasting side, and there's a dissertation in those days, now the research paper. I passed the written side with the highest marks and got the Mondavi Award, which I didn't know about. I took the exam in 97 or 8. I didn't know I'd got the award until 2003, because they don't tell you until you've actually become an MW. And then I tried to get the tasting side for at least 4 goes and fail. And I was a bit of a, getting a little bit despondent. And it coincided with me changing the whole, the winemaking come to an end. I went and did a degree at Brunel University. And having finished my degree, I got involved with a wine, an investor who wanted to start a wine company. And she wanted me to manage it for her, which I did. So I got into wine buying, got into tasting practice, decided I would sign up for the MW and get back on the course. I'd been given 3 years dispensation to leave it, which was, unusual, but I was allowed to do that. And then I got back on, and then I took the exam, the tasting exam. That's the part I hadn't passed, and passed it next time. So 5th go. And that's having done the dissertation. I did 2 dissertations, one of which failed, but one of which passed. And the minute I knew I'd got the tasting side, I was an MW. That was in 03. So 18 odd years now, 19 years almost.
And you've chosen to have a particular focus on English wine, as we're saying, and that's why you've got the book and we're having this conversation, and particularly with being an MW, you're going to have such a broad knowledge of wine in general. I was just wondering, what do you think is the best way for the industry to go? Like, where do you see it heading from now?
What, the UK wine growing industry, you mean?
Yes, yeah, and the producers. And what do you think would be a good route?
Well, I think it's it's grown organically. I mean, it's grown from a sort of hobby-based industry, if you could call it that, which you probably can't. It's grown from a lot of amateurs, a few professionals. I was unusual in that I was 27 when I started this journey, and there were very few other people of my age. I mean, Peter Hall at Breaky Bottom, who's 5 years older than me, he's now 78. Anthony Goddard and Barton Manor on the Isle of Wight, he's also, I think, 5 years older than me. But we three were sort of our almost the only people that are left from our intake, as it were. We all planted around 75, 6, 7. And most of the others are sadly are dead, because they were 50 and 60 and 70 when they started, because they had already they were farmers, or they'd made money in somewhere else. It was a retirement project for them. So there were very few of us who actually saw this as a business, as something which we could make our working lives out of. I was incredibly lucky because I had backing from the point of view of land ownership. I had backing, for 10 years we made no money. I was able to, live off my wits, as it were, and a bit of family help. So I was very lucky in that respect. And today, of course, it has changed completely. We've got a load of youngsters who have come into it, maybe their fathers, even their grandfathers. My oldest client, Sandhurst Vineyards, the grandsons are now running it, and their children are, sitting on tractors and looking forward to when they can get involved. So, we're into the sort of 4th generation. And you've certainly got granddaughters, grandsons, granddaughters of founders who are running businesses. They've grown up with the idea there is English wine, there is good English wine. It is a business. People do buy it. It's not such an outlandish thing as it was when I started with, when there was 500 acres. And today we've got almost, 10,000 acres almost. So the industry, I think, is changing. The most significant things that have happened, of course, apart from the size growth, apart from the amount of money that's gone into it, Nye Timber has probably invested £200 million in their enterprise, which is a phenomenal amount of money. And they're building for the long term. It's a generational business that they're creating. But we have now got significant outside investment, not only outside in terms of country-wise. So you've got Taittinger, you've got Pommery, you've got recently Henkel, of course, have bought into to Bolney. You've also got wine merchants within the UK buying in. So you've got Henner's was bought by I forget the name of the company, but they were bought. You've got Mansfield, which are involved with the Taittinger project, so they're a UK-based wine merchant. You've got one or two other, wine-interested people who have bought into English wines. So it's becoming much more of a mainstream occupation. There are, significant hurdles we have to climb and jump and land on the other side of, which we haven't yet done. Financially, it's quite a difficult business to make money in. It's not impossible, but it's quite difficult. Our yields lag well behind our competitors, which makes, obviously, from a cost point of view, makes life difficult. Except, of course, that actually makes you really sell your wine at the highest margins you can find. So selling it direct, obviously, a lot more vineyards are able to sell direct. We have a country of 60-odd million people. We normally have visitors, 20 million visitors a year. No, it's not at the moment, but I mean, they will come back. We've got a wine drinking population. We're all with most vineyards within reach of a large conurbation. London, obviously, but Manchester, Birmingham, perhaps not Manchester, but Bristol, all the big centres of the southeast that have got vineyards within reach. So wine tourism is undoubtedly going to grow. And I think if you look at every major wine producer in the UK, they've expanded their offering in terms of visitor attraction in lots of different ways. But some have got cafes, some have got restaurants, some have got hotels, got a better visitor experience, more tasting facilities, and that's good. And selling direct is undoubtedly going to be one of the major ways in which people can make money out of this business, because sustainability doesn't. Sustainability has to start with financial sustainability.
It has. Sorry, Stephen.
There's only so long a hedge fund that can keep pumping money in.
Exactly, and it's got to be at a point where, in order for them to maintain interested, they're going to have to be having a reward other than just, so this is a wonderful project to do, because as you're saying, it is about the longevity of planting a vineyard. Isn't a short-term plan.
No.
I was, as you said, there's a lot of investment going on. There are a lot of people being introduced to English wine. What would you say that for somebody who is brand new to it, what's the best way for them to be introduced? Should they just stick to sparklings, or should they throw themselves in? What would you say to somebody who has no clue about English wine at all, but they want to?
Well, I always start out by saying, right, what, where, who? So what are you going to grow and make? Where are you going to do it, and who's going to sell it? Unless you've got the answers to those three questions, unless you've got a vision of where you see this product being sold. If it's grapes, you need a market. If it's wine, you need a market. If it's bottled wine, you need a different market. If it's sparkling wine, you need a different market. You have to have a vision of where you're going with this. And before, I mean, we just made wine and hope we could sell it. There are wine merchants who sell wine, aren't there? No, well, it doesn't quite work like that, because with much more competition now. So, every time someone says to me, "Oh, well, I'd like to sell it in high-end restaurants and high-end hotels," you say, "Well, dream on," because that ain't going to happen very quickly. You can throw a lot of money at it. You can employ a fabulous PR company. I won't name any names, but there are one or two people who've done that, and they will get it in by degrees. But at what cost? Who knows? So I say to them, right, okay, depending on the size, obviously, if they're small, selling direct is much easier if they're large. If you've got 5-10 acres of that order, you can probably foresee selling most of it locally. If you've got 50 acres, no, you know where you're going to sell that locally. You have to have a wholesale distribution system set up, whether you run that or whether you're in the hands of a merchant. But then you need to look at the costings, you need to look at the margins, you need to look at the real costs of selling, of maintaining contact with your customers. Exporting is again, is an expensive process especially if you're only selling small volumes, because all your costs have to be borne by a very small volume. And I think a lot of people have found that exporting has not really yielded the rewards they thought it was going to. I mean, it's obviously taken a bit of a setback in the last 2 years, during which time English wine, I think, funnily enough, has done quite well out of COVID, possibly out of Brexit as well. but out of COVID. I think because people were trapped in the UK and looking for things to do, buying direct, visiting, and in the food chain, we all had exemption from restrictions on where you could work, and people could rock up to a vineyard and buy wine, and that was allowed, even during the tightest lockdown.
What do you think is a good way for somebody to be introduced to English wine if they're new to it? Because we're very lucky now that wine is everywhere. It's in all the supermarkets, and there was a time where it wasn't, and it was still quite specialist. As you're saying, that's not the case. So if you had somebody who wasn't used to English wine, what would your advice be to them?
I would say go and visit a local vineyard.
Okay.
Go away for the weekend. Go to Kent. Go to Sussex. Go to wherever. Visit a couple of vineyards. Stay the night somewhere nice. Go and find a producer. That you can find. A respectable producer. And there's lots of those. Go and see what they're offering and see what the different styles are, and start to learn a little bit more about it. I think that's by far and away the best way. And there you can see the vineyard, you can see the winery, you can speak to the people that run it, and you get a much better feel for what's on offer. And the big criticism all the time is, oh, it's so expensive. I have a standard set of replies about that. If it's a male, I say, well, how much would you pay for a football ticket? How much would you pay for a night at the opera? How much would you pay for a watch? Things that guys are interested in. Yeah, price is not an issue there. It's a different thing. Or if it's a woman, I say, well, I usually say, how much does your shoes cost you for your wedding? It's normally quite a several £100 figure. And how many times do you wear them? Once. No, I said, we all have our hobbies, and for a lot of people, wine is a hobby, and the price is part of that hobby. It's part of the day out salmon fishing, or the night at the opera, or going to the races, or whatever. It's part of the day's experience. It's going and taste some wine, finding something you like, buying it, taking it home, and then you're able to say to your friends and your the people that you're drinking about, oh, look, we bought this at so and so. It's really it's made like this, and it's got this variety in it, and it's it's really, try it, and if it's good wine, they'll like it, and it helps you become an ambassador for English wine. Obviously, if you're buying from a wine merchant or a supermarket, I say, well, next time you think about buying a bottle of champagne for whatever, a party or some sort of celebration, buy a bottle of English wine instead. It's about the same price as champagne, and I can guarantee you buy one of the major brands, you will be more than happy with it.
I completely agree. I think one of the
avoid the very dry ones, I say.
Well, I think that one of the barriers the industry faces is, in its simplest form, the introduction of English wine to people, because, as you say, there are still barriers and people aren't sure. Going to the vineyards is a wonderful way to do it, to soak it up, to experience what people are enjoying and why they're enjoying the wines. We've mentioned that you think sparkling wines could be a good way to start, but what about the stills? What's your impression on the stills? Because there's despite the volumes, it still seems
on a value for money scale, they lag behind sparklings. I think the good ones tend to be more expensive than they should be when you compare them to a lot of other countries' wines. The cheaper ones, you probably can get better value by buying cheap wine from somewhere else. It's difficult. There's a lot of people who buy English wine, I think, who don't probably buy a great deal of wine. They're not your average sort of wine buyer, and they just happen upon a vineyard, or they happen upon a wine and they like it, and they're prepared to pay the money for it. It's a difficult one. It's difficult, and that's something that I'm known as a sort of bit of a data freak, and I've been doing these yield reports for the last 18, 19, and 20. In fact, I've done them for 6 years. I've got 6 years data now, quite reliable data about yields of different varieties and yields of different regions, and things like row spacing and vine density and altitude, including sugar and acid readings. And so there's some element of quality in there, and it is possible to make to grow grapes and make profits on reasonably priced still wine, but it's quite difficult. You have to have the vineyard in the best place, growing the right varieties, doing the job well. And, as we see, there are places in the country, I mean, the Crouch Valley has, as I said earlier, I think that's becoming known as a place for some very, very good grapes, partially on the back of the 18 harvest, but also 20 was good. 21, I think, was less good for still wine, but then, that's a good year for sparkling. So you need flexibility, which again, is something that if you're growing Pinot and Chardonnay, and Meunier, you've got the flexibility of doing still wines in great years and sparkling wines in what are perceived for still wine, maybe not such great years. That's part of the sort of insurance you have when you plant a variety. Now, still wines, there's a little bit more work tonight to be done on that, I think.
What about so I think the English reds are probably quite a barrier to entry, shall we say, for people, because they are very, very different. They're much lighter in texture and body, and some of them are a lot more fruit forward. And the average consumer, might be the wrong way of putting it, but say somebody who goes into a supermarket, there's this huge wall of wine, they'll generally grab predominantly the cheapest one, and then which may be a Malbec or a very mass-produced wine, and they will compare the two. It's until you're involved with wine and understand.
Yeah, well, I don't think most growers should try and make red wine.
Right, that was going to be my question. Do you think it's
how much red wine from Sancerre is to people? I mean, I know everything has changed with climate change, but I mean, you don't go to the Loire really. Anyway, this end of the Loire looking for red wine. You don't go to Muscadet looking for red wine. You don't go to lots of places only produce white wine. It's changing, obviously, yeah, with climate change and with people using different varieties. But I just think that on they're lower down the value chain, and I think much better to produce a rosé, for instance. I've got quite a few clients now who are just growing Pinot Noir for rosé, and got one particular client who we planted last year who's got. The current idea is to make a high-end rosé, probably retailing at £20 or maybe more, still rosé from Pinot Noir, and I think that's a very good business proposition.
Do you think some of that is also due to the fact that a rosé you can release very, very young? It doesn't have to have much bottle length, like a red or oak, so therefore that improves your cash flow. Is that part of that, do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I've had some good, the 18 vintage was obviously an amazing vintage, and there's a lot of quite interesting red wines made from that vintage. And yes, there will be spots in the country where particular vineyards planted with the right clones, the right varieties, knowing what they're doing, got the canopy management and the disease control right, who can let the grapes get to full ripeness. And they will manage to make red wines year in, year out, and they will age them, and they'll be selling them at 3 or 4 years old, and they'll probably be getting premium price for it. But they're going to be small volume. It's not going to be supermarket shelf stuff, I don't believe. But I'm happy to be proved wrong, because I'm a bit of a pessimist. But my job is I get a phone call, an email, whatever, from somebody saying I've got some land, or I'm looking for land. I'm interested in growing vines. I've read your book, or I've seen your book, blah blah blah. So I have to go and see them, and I have to convince them, in some way, that this is actually a profitable business. I can't persuade them to plant if I say no, this is just a money sink into which you've got to keep pouring cash. I have to come up with a plan which says, right, if you do this, if you do that, the chances are you sell it well and the wine's up to scratch, you will be able to make a return on what your investment. If I couldn't do that, I wouldn't have a business. Lots of people say to me, I'm not in it for making profit. I just I take a step back and say, look, that's not the sort of client I want. I want someone to be happy with their investment, to make that investment pay.
So it's still very much it has to be a business, which of course it does if you're investing. It's all about money, not passion.
I got a file of people who I've been to see. I don't even go into these. I look at the land on Google Earth. It's 150 meters facing the wrong way. I just say, look, I'm not really going to be able to go down there and say, I love your site, And then they say, oh, well, we're not in it for a profit. And I said, no, I appreciate that. I said, but find someone else, because there's someone else to take your money. I said, but I'm not going to. And quite often they're quite happy with that. And, they'll take, if I go visit, we'll discuss the whole thing. And then, maybe, 3 or 4 years later, they may come back and say, look, we've been looking, we found some other land. You said the last time, can you come have a look at this bit of land? We think it's much better. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. And, maybe we get it off the ground and they start planting.
Do you think that sorry, I was going to just on that note, because there are a lot of producers now, there are new vineyards being planted, and this seems to keep increasing. But do you think that's actually a good way for the industry to go, because it's going to be lots of small pockets of producers? Or do you think it would be better to have higher volume from, or in theory, higher volume from less producers, so less variety?
No, I think the diversity, the more reasonable sized vineyards there are, the better, because they'll find their markets much easier. The problem is marketing.
Yeah, of course.
The problem is not growing. There's a problem finding a site, okay, but that can be, with time and with funds, that can be overcome. Once you've found a decent site, the growing side is easy, really. A lot easier than other crops, and no more expensive than other crops, to be honest. You put a hop garden in, which lasts you 20 years, that costs you just as much as putting a vineyard in, which can last you twice that length of time. Yesterday's hops, last year's hops are not worth anything. Last year's wine, the year before's wine from 10 years ago can be worth a lot of money. And so, it's one of the very few agricultural crops that increases in value the older it gets. I'm sure there are others, 1,000-year eggs. I don't know. There's probably are some other crops, but very, very few. Certainly not as big as wine. There's a whole industry based upon selling it. There's a whole industry based upon writing about it, criticizing it. There's websites devoted to it. It's an agricultural crop like no other, and so it gets people interested. And the more vineyards you have, the more reasonable size produce. I'm not talking about 2-acre plots. I'm talking about 5-acre, 10-acre plots. So they're producing a reasonable amount of wine. They can afford to have someone help them with the selling. They can afford to have a retail shop on site. And so, and I think that they will have much more of a chance of surviving without having to put lots of money into it than someone who's planted 50 acres, 100 acres, who then has to set up a whole sales operation. The thing that attracted me about the Taittinger project was, of course, that Patrick McGrath, who runs Hatch Mansfield, came to me and said, "Look, we're as a company, we're doing quite well. We're owned by 2 very significant wine companies, so we have a little bit of have to watch what we sell. We have a small number of brands. We can't have competing brands, but we don't have an English wine presence. How would we get into English wine as a company?" And I said, well, there's, you could buy an existing producer. I said, there's not really many worth buying at the moment. And I said, you can buy grapes, and you can set up a winery or have a contract winery and do it that way. Or I said, you go the whole hog and just buy land, plant it, and off you go. And he said, well, what would you recommend? So, well, obviously I said, well, buy land, I'll help you. And off we went. That was it. 2-3 years later, we'd found some land, put the package together. Taittinger were keen to come on board. The other investors we've got were also keen to come on board. We sold the whole idea to them, and then off we went, bought the land and planted, and here we are today with our first wine bottled last May, sorry. And so 2 or 3 years' time, we will have our first product on the shelf. But that was led by Hatch Mansfield, who have a turnover of, 75 million or something like that. We've got 30 or 40 salespeople on the road, or in the sales side. All of whom, or many of whom, are actually shareholders. But all of whom are waiting for this wine, which has been a long time coming. But when it does come, it'll go on some good shelves. It'll go in some good wine lists, on, hotels and restaurants. I can guarantee that. Yeah.
How do you think?
And that's what made that project attractive. But if someone comes to me and just says, right, I want to plant 150 acres of vines, and I've got no idea where I'm going to sell it, I will step back a bit and say, well, hang on a minute, you need to think about this hard. Are you prepared for the?
Sorry, Steve. I was going to say, it definitely helps having the bigger brands on board, and obviously Pomeroy have got Lewis Pomeroy England, and they're producing wonderful wines, and as you say, if Taittinger are now on board and hopefully their sparkling wines will be coming through, what do you see as do you think that is a benefit for the industry, having this outside investment coming in? Do you think that will help raise the profile?
Well, I think it's done that already. I think the fact that two fairly established and well-known champagne houses have put some money. I mean, the Domaine Evremond, as it's called, is only 51% owned by Taittinger. There's 49% is basically UK owned. Pommery, I'm not sure what the shareholding is there. I suspect it's 100% of Rank and Pommery. I mean, I think it just adds to the story, really. You know, and for years people have been ringing me up and say, "Oh, I hear Merchondon are buying Night Timber," or I hear, you know, when Night Timber was sold in 2005, when Eric Herrema bought it. You know, so many people said to me, "I hear Merchondon are buying it," or "I hear Merchondon are doing this." You know, it was all nonsense. It never actually happened. But you know, now it has happened. I think it's really put a you know, different sort of twist on it. Oh, why are they getting involved? It must be all right. Which to a certain extent it is. I mean, I think it's good news from. I think it gives Taittinger a little bit more of a, you know, they've been in the press a bit more. I mean, you know, I don't suppose it's done their PR any harm whatsoever. So I think it's a good thing.
Do you think other ways that will potentially benefit our industry is the fact that we have now left the EU? Do you know any impacts that's had already?
I don't know that's going to happen, make any difference really. I mean, you know, a lot of it depends, you know, the cost of wine, a lot of it depends on the currency. I mean, the euro's getting a little bit better for us, but it's probably not going to get back to where it was previously, so the wine would be more expensive. But you know, the cost, I mean, let's be honest, most wine sells around the sort of, forget sparkling, but most still wine is selling sort of £6-7. You know, I don't know what the average price is, 5 something, I think, but you know, and at that price, the cost of the wine actually makes very little difference because it's mostly soaked up with duty, with VAT, with bottling, with distribution, with profit from the retailer. So the cost of the wine could double in price. It wouldn't make a lot of difference to the retail price, because the wine is you know, the wine itself is relatively cheap. So I don't know that Brexit. I think what Brexit stroke the pandemic has done is made people think a little bit more about such things as food miles, about provenance, about buying local. You know, lots more people are selling food locally now for all kinds, and I think that's going to carry on. I don't see that stepping back to where it was before. I think that there's lots of people now, especially as sending food to you know, for larger producers, sending food abroad has become slightly more difficult. It will, I'm sure it'll balance out in the end. A lot of smaller producers are finding that they can sell locally, and good luck to them. I think that's great, and I think that'll help English wine as well.
So if we look, say, outside of the departure from the EU, what do you see as the future for the industry? Like, how do you see producers moving forward, or do you have any advice for them?
Well, I think you know, you have to, it's organic growth. I mean, yeah, it just really depends on what sort of lifestyle the owners want, and what their finances are like. I mean, how much time are they going to give to their vineyard? How much money do they expect to make out of it? You know, selling wine direct to the consumer is, you know, has its limitations and it has its drawbacks. You know, you have to be there at times when people want to buy it. You know, it means weekends, it means Christmas time, it means, you know, high days and holidays. You can't sell wine unless you're there, and that's the problem with retailing. So as soon as you hand it over to someone else to sell, you're giving away a massive margin. You know, no one's going to sell your wine. No retailer and no shopkeeper is going to sell a product they're not making a profit from. Why would they? And so, you know, one bottle sold direct to the public is worth 3 times the margin of a bottle sold by a retailer, by a trader, by a wholesaler, by a restaurant. Maybe not quite so much, but you know, because restaurants have a slightly different pricing profile. But so it's not, you know, retailing is not for everybody. But if you're a sufficient size, you can afford to employ people, and you can afford to have nice premises and so forth, where people get pleasure out of coming and tasting, then I think that's the way forward. And as you organically expand your sales, as you learn where the best sales are, the best sales outlets, you can afford to say, well, we need to plant a little bit more, or you buy in a few more grapes, or you build your own winery if you haven't got one. You make it, you start developing it, and that's the way most people have gone. And I don't see that changing. And I think it's becoming, yes, okay, there's lots of restaurants and hotels which don't have English wine on their list, but you see it so much more now on wine lists. I mean, I live in London, so I see more. We probably eat out a couple of times a week, and English wine is becoming much more of a regular on wine lists.
It is. I think, it's nothing but good news that it's being pushed by sommeliers, and it is getting out there in all these myriad of different forms, including the large supermarkets, as we mentioned. Stephen, thank you so much for putting your time aside. I thought, just before we wrap up, what are your future plans? What's coming next for yourself?
Well, at age 33, I'm winding down. I have children who live in New York, Dallas, and Hawaii. So I don't see them very often. I don't see my 5 grandchildren very often. I see a lot of younger people coming into the business. Good luck to them. A lot of consultants in now who are, 30, 40, and got another 30, 40 years left in them. I'm quite happy to carry on with my writing, I'm involved with WineGB a little bit. I'm involved with the MWs a little bit. I'm just in the middle of, I haven't got a new book. I've got a couple of ideas which I've been pitching to publishers. I got one idea of a self-published book, because I currently, apart from the book that you're reading now, all my others are self-published. I got 3 or 4 books which sell quite well. The textbook and the wine growing in Great Britain sells quite well. They will both need updating at some stage. So I got enough on my plate, with one thing and another.
Stephen, thank you for your time. Much appreciated.
Playing bridge when I'm not doing anything else.
Thank you. All the best.
All right. Okay. Thanks very much.